Hey guys, this is Bob and welcome to another episode of Whattaya Buyin, the show where we talk about the newest releases in games, movies, and television. Since this is kind of a delayed episode, I'm going to be talking about last week's releases as well as this week's releases. This week brings us a look at a mostly lackluster 2 weeks at the box office, a plethora of video games, and some of the best that Walking Dead has to offer. Plus a new television series exclusively on PlayStation. Also, I've gotten a lot of requests to take a look at the new 3DS, so I'll be doing that this week as well. Plus, as always, look for my Netflix pick of the week. Let's get started with the movies. These 2 weeks have brought us 3 different action movies and a retelling of a fairy tale classic. First up is The Gunman and Run All Night. Both of these movies are about aging actors that want to show us how young they feel by killing a bunch of dudes, apparently. While Run All Night, starring Liam Neeson, is doing a little better than The Gunman, they're both still not doing very much for critics and action fans alike. A little aside, am I the only one that thinks of Mr. Magoo and the Naked Gun guy whenever I hear Liam Neeson? Well, Liam Neeson is the action star and Leslie Nielsen is the comedian, but how awesome would it be to see Frank from the Naked Gun take out a bunch of Russian bad guys without making it too comedic? That would be really cool. The next action flick is the latest installment in the Divergent series, titled Insurgent. Insurgent tells the tale of a girl that wants to do a bunch of things, but she can't because these guys won't let her do it, or something, or so I'm told. I've never actually seen the first one, and I heard this one is faring much worse. So I don't really know the plot. I've looked up a little bit, and I was so confused that I just didn't care. Okay, now on to the best movie of the bunch, Cinderella, the live-action retelling of the fairy tale that we all know and love. Cinderella has been very well received mostly, but there was only a few complaints saying that it might be a little too sweet for some. Hey, after spending a day with violent video games and movies, I kind of want a little bit of sweetness in my life. I think we all deserve it. Perhaps one day they can mix the sweetness and violence together. Alright, you bippity boppities, it's time to show my stepmother what we're made of. Yo ma, catch bitch! That's a place I want to live. On to the video games! Okay, so there have been quite a few video game releases in the last 2 weeks, but I just want to touch on the few really standout titles. I want to get to the smaller yet excellent titles first. Starting off, we have Ori and the Blind Forest. This unique little title is not only gorgeous, but critics are giving it high praise for being quite fun as well. This is one title that is actually making me want to buy an Xbox One more than I do now. Well done. Xbox owners, brag away. Next up is a sequel to an indie top-down hardcore action game. Hotline Miami 2 is a sequel to the wildly successful original. The original was crazy, fun, and brutal, so I'm assuming that this one is up the ante in every single way. Next we have the latest episodes in Resident Evil Revelations 2. Now, this is a game that I've been singing high praise for ever since I really talked about it. You can hear me talk about it on my podcasts and my videos before, and I have said nothing but good things. There may be a few problems, but if you're in for a co-op game that even has a hint of a Resident Evil experience with some action and horror, this is a great series to pick up, and it's $6 an episode, and there's only 4 episodes. You get a lot of content, and it's totally worth it. I recommend it. I recommend it highly. So if you're into Resident Evil action, horror, or co-op at all, go for it. DMC has returned. That's right, the reboot of the Devil May Cry series that came out on last generation is now available on current gen systems. This version gives fans a nice visual upgrade, as well as some combat tweaks and some DLC inclusions. Fans and critics alike are praising this edition as a definitive DMC experience. Alright, next we have the latest in the Final Fantasy franchise. Final Fantasy Type 0 is a newer breed of Final Fantasy. While it does have the aesthetics of a familiar Final Fantasy game, the combat is what really sets this game apart. This sort of fast-paced action is new to the series and is praised by fans and critics alike. Fan of the series before but were turned off by the tactical or RPG combat, this edition may be the one to jump on. And last but not least comes the biggest game release in the last 2 weeks, Battlefield Hardline. Battlefield Hardline has released to some pretty positive reception. This is the first Battlefield game in quite a long time that has actually been praised for its story over its multiplayer component. While the multiplayer seems to be just fine, it doesn't compare to Battlefield 4 or 3 before that. The single player is also said to pack quite a punch with a lot of humor thrown in. Alright, now before I end the video game segment altogether, I just want to mention the 3DS, or the new 3DS. This new 3DS has an improved field of view, an analog nub, and some revved up engine parts. All of this sounds great and everything, but it can't be topped by the combined forces of Sony and Apple. As you can see, the iPhone Vita is quite a wonderful product, and it has 2 touchscreens that are both playing the same game, as you can see. What? That was supposed to happen. That was supposed to happen. Alright, you win new 3DS, but this game isn't over yet. Oh no. And that'll do it for video games this week. I know a lot more came out, and there's a lot more worth mentioning, but if I did that, I'd have to do another video just for that segment. Next up is television, and for the first time in quite a while, I have more to talk about than just The Walking Dead. But first, I'll talk Walking Dead. These last 2 weeks have been quite a doozy. I mean, seriously, last week's episode alone was crazy. Spoiler alert, someone dies. Someone dies. You're welcome. Seriously though, they managed to kill off a main character in one of the most brutal and heinous ways. Probably worse than Herschel and everyone else in the series. That's brutal, just brutal. If you haven't seen this episode yet, stay away from social media, at least for quite a while, because this is one episode that everyone is talking about. It's all over Facebook and Twitter, so stay away. Give it about 2 weeks. The season finale will be fine. Besides that, this season is leading up to something huge and something that I think will blow people's minds. I just don't know what it is yet. The next television show that I want to talk about is a PlayStation exclusive called Powers. Powers takes place in a world where quite a few people actually have superpowers. And in this world, there are police that don't have powers that try to lock up the bad powers and try to catch them. Which is a cool concept, because when you figure normal people trying to catch people with powers that can do almost anything, the concept can get pretty crazy. You might have to have 100 people on one guy. You never know, but it's the show so far is pretty good. You can have the first full season for free on PlayStation Plus, and the first episode is free to everybody. But just a warning that the first episode is probably the weakest of them all. It definitely gets better, and if you stick with it, you'll probably find something that you really enjoy. While the acting is so-so, depending who's on screen, the effects are a little cheesy, and the plot isn't too great right now, I see a lot of potential for this show, and I urge everyone to check it out. Next, I want to bring you my Netflix pick for the week. This week, I'm going to talk about Arrow. With so much praise given to the 3rd season of Arrow, I want to point out that season 1 and 2 of Arrow are available on Netflix. The first episode alone is a fantastic look into how Oliver Queen, Arrow, became the Arrow. Oliver is stuck on an island for 5 years, and in those 5 years he learns the skills to survive. Those skills also give him the ability to become the Arrow and take matters into his own hands. I wonder what it would be like if I was stuck on an island for 5 years. 5 years stuck on an island. I've learned things. I've done things. Yeah, so have you. Yeah, I know, Wilson. You know what? Wilson, I'm sorry! Well, that'll do it for this edition of Whattaya Buyin. Make sure you stay tuned next week for another episode. You can also follow me on Twitter at Babam, and make sure to like and subscribe to this video if you like what I do. Also, I host 2 wonderful podcasts, one about love and gaming and one about general gaming. You can find them on iTunes at Babam. Thank you for watching. I'm out.